Namaskaram, and welcome to this week's edition of Super Solo Saturdays. This week, once again, we are going to concentrate on these extremely exhilarating talks that we've been having with Dr. Anupama Kailash. We had left last time the idea of the influence of social, religious, political scenarios on the use and interpretation of musical compositions and their use in dance. We shall continue with that thought and several other very interesting aspects on this, unfortunately, for the time being, final in the series of defying definitions with Dr. Anupama Kailash and, of course, our Asthana Vidwan, Satish Venkateshwaran. Come, join us. And I shall presently bring Anupama ji in to join us. Namaskaram.
Namaskaram.
So happy to have you back. And as I told our viewers, unfortunately, all good things have at least pause buttons, and this is going to be a pause button to our discussions after this. And then we shall find more interesting things to talk about and continue with you and come and niggle at you till you tell us.
Absolutely.
As we had Anupama ji last time, where we left off was we were talking about the fact that there were different types of content, and a lot of it led how those compositions were made. And sometimes the content followed the layout. And we looked at some of the nomenclature that existed in our texts. What I would like us to start discussing today is, as for instance, we had said that the Daru, for instance, was the most ready example where the content defined whether it was a Pravesha Daru, a Tillana, or a Daru Varnam, or how it went.
Yes.
What are some of the other indicators that you can perhaps share with us about this? I know I'm stuck on this nomenclature, and you were trying very hard to get me out of this nomenclature idea, because nomenclature is like compartmentalization. But unfortunately, a lot of performance is completely led by this compartmentalization, by what are we calling it, how is this supposed to be, and a lot of grammarification of the way we perform. And I think that's true even in the musical field. I think in music also, you all are very tightly compartmentalized into the manner of presentation as a sort of composition. And I think that is what we would like to explore in this, the final of our series. But of course, also the very, very important aspect of how this compartmentalization of padas or content compositions into certain genres of presentation has actually taken away from the exploration of rasa in each one of them, because they've got typified with certain types of rasas.
Yes.
So let us start with other compositions that were content-led or had or followed a layout, a format.
You remember we were discussing last time about, the theatrical forms which have their own, like the Daruvu or any of these ideas. So when in our modern understanding, like when we look at the modern, interpretations of Bharatanatyam or any other format, so if we take something, say like a Shabdam, okay, and its Shabdam is in fact the third piece that even you do in the Bharatanatyam Margam.
Yeah.
So when you take something like a Shabdam, the known information that we have so far is that one of the earliest Shabdams was composed by Swati Tirunal, and it is like Sarasija Kshilu Jalakamade.
Yes.
Or one of these pieces. This is one of the earlier known Shabdams. But I found some very interesting information when I did a project for Sangeet Natak Academy on Shabdam and Salam Darbu as a genre. Now, if we look at this idea, the Shabdam existed much before even Swati Tirunal came into the picture. Because if you see Melatur Venkatrama Shastri's Prahlada Natakam, which is obviously around the 16th century, it is Achyutappa Nayaka's period. So, because he is the one who gave the Melatur village to them, Achyutapuram, to the Melatur Bhagavatas. So, this genre existed then. Because the opening of the Prahlada Natakam happens with Prahlada Pattabhisheka Shabdam, in which the I'm sorry, I can't hear.
It's called the Shabdam there.
So it's called Prahlada Pattabhisheka Varnana.
Okay.
So but it follows, it is a Shabdam, and today it is danced as a Shabdam in Kuchipudi also.
Okay.
So it is a typical Shabdam format. Mm-hmm. And if you go to Melatur to watch their Nrsimha that time, the festival, the Bhagavata Melam, it starts with the Prahlada Pattabhisheka Shabdam. So it's very interesting for us to see that Shabdam initially what happens is when every form, as it starts developing this thing of solo repertoire or a group repertoire or theatrical repertoire, as this keeps happening, you start culling material from different sources to create your repertoire.
Yeah.
Shabdam is one such piece where they have taken the Shabdam from primarily a theatrical tradition, actually. So and I have many more, I was working with Gautami Granthalaya and some of the other manuscripts libraries also in Andhra, in which I found several Bhagavata stories, Yakshaganams, in which the Shabdam format is there.
Okay.
So where they are talking in the Shabdam format. So today we know of Kashinada Kavi, who's famous for the Shabdams. And we know of Narana Kavi, another poet who is also known for his Shabdams. But the format in its nascent form existed for a very long time, much before these people came in. And we can also see that the content, as you said, was there were two formats here, either devotional or Shringarik. So it was either, something where now the Shringarik element most probably would have come in a little later when from the temple, the focus shifted to the courts or the Rajasthanas.
But wouldn't there also have been, the way I look at the content that we had even earlier in the temples, Shringara was really what we call Madhura Bhakti, has that element of Shringar in it. I think the more what we call the Pache Shringar must have come in after the move to the court. Because otherwise the Shringara element, I think, was always there, was it not?
Shringara element was always there. But what I'm saying is in the Shabdam format.
Shabdam format, okay.
Because in the initial Shabdam format, it is always primarily a narrative to tell you the story of the drama in short before.
Yes, extolation.
Mostly that was the purpose.
Yes.
It was just like a narrative, like a synopsis of the entire drama being told in the beginning. Mm-hmm. So primarily they use the Shabdam format for that, which is why you can see the repetitive, either Mohana or Kamboja, and then you have the repetitive same tune coming. The melodic structure is very identical. Every line sounds the same.
Yeah.
So that is like a narrative structure. But when it came to the king's courts, the same idea of Kaivaramu or Kaivada, as we were discussing in the last, episode. So we were talking about this Namavali, praising the king, telling the king that you're this, you're that. Now this, we can even find traces of this in the earlier references to the Varnam also. So I'll come to that.
Okay.
So, so even in the Shabdam, this Namavali thing, when it started, so they would come and they would say, Dhana Dhanata Sarasudu Aura, so you will talk about Tulajaji or Shahaji or somebody, and a list of all his achievements will be read out in the Shabdam. So it is almost like a melodic tala structured version of the Kaivaram, actually.
Okay.
It was almost like that. And then we adopted many parts of it to our solo traditions. So if you see Kuchipudi, in Kuchipudi, the Shabdam format which we perform is very much like that. It's either a eulogy to a king or to a god, and we follow the same pattern.
Yeah.
But in Bharatanatyam, the Shabdam format has changed a little and has taken on the connotations after the Tanjavur Quartet and the Swati Tirunal intervention in this Shabdam literature. So that the methodology changed.
Yeah.
Yes, Satish.
What I would like to know is, as you talked about the Prahalada Pattabhisheka Varnana, Anupama ji, you said the term Shabdam is not seen in that. It just says that it's Varnana. As a musician, I am interested to know, when did the term Shabdam actually came in? I mean, did any composer give the term Shabdam for one of his compositions, say during the 16th or 17th century, from which it started to be called as a Shabdam? That is question number one. And
so, yeah. Yes.
And secondly, usually Kuchipudi Shabdams are done in Mohanam. Has it been the tradition? Because we do it in Kamboji in Bharatanatyam, but in Kuchipudi it is always Mohanam. So some
Before you address that, let me just tell you that one of the things that we learned when we were learning the Shabdam, well, the reason that it was called, first of all, we know that it was brought in from the Kuchipudi format into the Bharatanatyam format. But the other thing that we were told is that it came from the Manduka Shabdam. The repetitive cadence of the music was because of the Manduka call, like the croaking of the frog. And that is why Kamboji was chosen, because that was the closest to that, that notation.
Okay.
That was the introduction that we were given to the Shabdam. Now you can embellish it with your knowledge.
No, it is, that is true. That's what I said when I said, so there is one little controversy about what is the Manduka Shabdam and what is the Mandodari Shabdam. So there are two Shabdams here. So this is a big problem which nobody has actually solved. So when you see the Mandodari Shabdam, it actually begins with a description of Krishna Devaraya. Okay. So it will start with Rajadhiraja Veera Pratapa Sri Krishna Raya Bhupa. It starts like that. And then in the court, it is like the dance use is talking about the story of Mandodari. But in the Manduka Shabdam, it starts with a description of the Sarovar or the lake in which the frogs are, making these sounds.
Yeah.
And here you will find the Gajendra Moksha stories enacted.
Okay.
So there was a certain belief that these two were actually one piece. But then there was a split.
Bifurcation.
So starting with the lake, the pond, and then the Gajendra Moksha story, and then consecutively Mandodari comes to that area, and then Ravana comes and takes her away. That was supposed to be the format.
Okay.
But now it got separated into the Manduka Shabdam and the Mandodari Shabdam. Now, we are also trying to still find what exactly, because there is nothing, it ends very abruptly, the Shabdam. Even in Kuchipudi, when you see it, the Mandodari Shabdam still has a better, finish to it. But the Manduka Shabdam, it ends pretty abruptly.
Okay.
The Gajendra Moksha part of it ends, it's not very convincing, the ending. You feel there is some lacuna there. There is some interpolation that has been done at some point of time. So, but even before the idea of the Manduka Shabdam or the Mandodari Shabdam or any of this also, we are seeing the Shabdam format already in Yakshaganam, which predates it at least by 1.5 centuries.
Yeah.
So we are already seeing the format in the Yakshaganam. It is just that we're not taking it seriously because it is part of the Yakshaganam text. So even in the Yakshaganams also, they call it a Shabdam only.
Okay. So the terminology,
we call it Shabdams. The terminology is there. So there will be something called a Krishna Shabdam, which is not the Krishna Shabdam that we know of, which Kuchipudi dancers actually do today. Now that itself is a hugely controversial Shabdam. So what the Kuchipudi, people like Satish who sing even for Kuchipudi dancers, they will know that the very famous Yaduvamsha Sudam Buddhi Chandra Swamirara Shabdam is a complete interpolation. That is not the original lyric of the Shabdam at all.
Really? Did you know
that Shabdam?
I didn't know this.
No, that Shabdam is actually Swamirara Damarla Timmendra Kumara. So it is addressed to a king called Damarla Timmendra Kumara. So this is a person from Kalahasti. He belongs to the Kalahasti lineage of kings. So even if you look at the literature, so it just needs a little analysis for us to understand, because there is a line in that which says Kavijana Poshaka Mandara. So when you say Kavijana Poshaka Mandara, if it is supposed to be a Shabdam that is for Krishna, why will Krishna be doing Kavijana Poshana? It is not meant for Krishna. It is actually meant for a king. But this has been, there is a juxtaposition. This Damarla Timmendra Kumara was removed and Yaduvamsha Sudambudhi Chandra has been juxtaposed into the Shabdam. But with a lot of it remaining the same. The rest of it remaining the same.
Anupamaji, a lot, I can speak from my experience of the Varnams and stuff that we do in Kalakshetra, and we do know that Atte entered the field at a time when she consciously tried to remove the Narastuti element in order to be able to re-establish the dance form. But a lot of the content has either been edited out or interpreted as a Devastuti instead of a Narastuti, because of course the kings were named after gods, and usually after Vishnu, some form of Vishnu. And that is how they've been interpreted in order to be able to perform them with, again, that element of bhakti as opposed to stuti of the king, or,
Yes. So, yeah, I agree. So probably that is the reason why, you didn't want to be praying to, you didn't want to be singing to Damarla Timmendra Kumara. You thought it would be better to be singing to Yaduvamsha Sudambudhi Chandra, who is Krishna.
Yeah.
So, so the reasons for the juxtaposition, it's very obvious that at the time, they were trying to make everything, cleanse it of its so many elements, which they thought would, are unnecessary. But still, it doesn't take away the truth that it is a juxtaposition, that these are interpolations. And the context always decided, actually, for us. It was the context that decided how or what would be the content.
Yeah.
Because if it is a court, then you would have to sing a praise of a king.
Yeah.
And trying to say that it is not so would take away from that context. Then it would blur the history of that period for us.
Totally.
If we try to change it, it will totally blur what is the actual history of that period. So this thing, Shabdam, because it was sound, it was continuously doing a stuti to the deity or to the king. It was simply called a Shabdam, which was a narrative. And when the word salam came in, then it became a salam daruvu.
Okay.
But the formats are identical. The salam daruvu and the Shabdam formats are identical. And it is also very interesting that Kuchipudi gurus like Vedantam Parvatisham Garu, when he wrote his Nritya Tarangidi, in which he gave a list of Shabdams and Salam Darvus, he has written one for the other. There are many songs in which the word Salam comes, which he has titled as Shabdams.
Okay.
Also.
Okay.
So what I'm saying is there is no defined line.
Well, that is why you're calling this series Defying Definitions, because honestly, those definitions are not so hard and fast as we apparently see them today. Let me lead you into the next one. Like you said you'd speak about the Varnam in the same context. And another question that came to mind while we were talking, and over the past 2 episodes, it's been in my mind. Why is it that most of the history that is documented or can be followed back or is known in dance and music circles is centered around the Kuchipudi, Telugu, Andhra space. Most of it seems to be anchored here. When we try and look for, because obviously there were poets who wrote music and compositions in Tamil Nadu long ago, and those pieces of music are still available. But why is it that this, and like we spoke in our very first episode, that this Yulapathikaram, I mean, it's a Sangha period piece of literature, had almost the exact format that we follow today in the same manner.
Yes.
So therefore, that longevity of that exists. But why is it that every time that we go back to looking for the nomenclature, to looking for the connectivity, I mean, I'd like to understand, why is it that it seems to be anchored in this belt rather than in a broader area of southern India? You know, how would that, if you can just sort of...
I have also discussed this actually a lot with some of my friends in Chennai also. Now, if you see the the Sangam literature, the Path Pate and all those elements which you actually find in Sangam, I don't know much about Sangam literature. Let me be very honest. So I have not really studied that era period, but it, as you said, it appears very strange to me that recorded history of Bharatanatyam is always post Tanjavur Quartet.
Yeah.
Like as if nothing before that exists. So I think that is an area, it's a lacuna. I'm sure there is a huge dancing tradition, which is what, those who are studying it as Sadir should be exploring.
Yeah.
They should be exploring this huge context. Now, the reason I think why it is...
And ask Satish, musically this fall back, and you've been singing for Kuchipudi and for Mohiniyattam and for Bharatanatyam continuously, right? Musically, do you find this connectivity? Do you find this, that if you, when you go to look, because I've heard you speak about the pre-Trinitary composers as well. And so, obviously everything else came after that. So if those are recorded, how come when we're talking about dance, we don't get to that, to those texts or to those connections? Is there anything that you know of that we can connect with and, take those?
In dance, definitely in Bharatanatyam, of course, we have certain items of the pre-Trinity composers that are performed. Like in the Kalakshetra repertoire also, we have varnams of Ramaswamy Dikshitra being performed. Ramaswamy Dikshitra was a pre-Trinity composer, father of Muthuswamy Dikshitra. Mm-hmm. I think the Purna Chandrika Varnam that is of Ramaswamy Dikshitra. And of course, certain rare varams are there. I think it is only dependent on the inquisitiveness of a dancer to go and find the texts rather than...
I like the way he just threw the ball neatly back into our court. So I come back to you.
I think he's right, because dancers have fixated their understanding of the repertoire as post Tanjavur Quartet or post Tanjavur period.
And if I may interfere, if I may say so, then they're so much fixated on the Tanjavur Quartet. The focus is so much on the concept of Margam and attributing it to Tanjavur Quartet that the focus on the pre-Trinity composer is quite less, or they probably don't want to venture into it. They're quite fixated on the Tanjavur Quartet.
No, I totally agree. If you fix yourself on the Tanjavur based idea, then a lot of the anchoring will come from the present day Telugu land, because the two major dynasties which supplied this material were initially chieftains and emissaries of the Vijayanagara Empire.
Okay.
So if you look at the Nayaka kings who came, the Nayaka kings also were Telugu kings.
Yeah.
Who were vassals of Krishnadevaraya, who declared independence after the battle of Tallikota. And Krishnadevaraya's empire, declined, and a lot of these artists and people shifted to Tanjavur area, and then the Tanjavur Nayaka kings declared independence. So a lot of it would be centered around that. So almost by default, Telugu became the court language of composition primarily.
Yes, this is what
It is
I was
a
talking
post
about.
Krishna Dev.
The
It
influence,
is a post Krishna.
this influence of the socio-political scenario on the compositions is so strong.
Yes.
It is very, very
It is.
significant.
It is, and it's very interesting because if you look at even the Nayaka kings, all of them composed in Telugu. Post Nayaka kings, even the Maratha kings, the Bhosle dynasty, which came with Tekoji, Shahaji, Sarfoji, along with writing a little bit in Marathi and Sanskrit and a little bit, a major chunk of their compositions also were in Telugu.
Yeah.
So somewhere it is very obvious that because of the Tuluva, the Saluva dynasties of Vijayanagar, ruling literally almost a largest chunk of southern India, right up to, below Tanjavur, Tirutani, till Hampi, till Utkal in Orissa and Hampi in Vijayanagara. So because of them having their dominion over most of the southern Indian lands, ad hoc Telugu seems to have been established as the language of arts and letters, in the court especially.
After Sanskrit.
After Sanskrit.
Yeah.
In fact, at that time, even more than Sanskrit, there was prolific work being written in Telugu.
Because it was also the language of the common people, the largest
language of the common people.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's, I think, because Sanskrit.
And a lot of the artists who were from the Telugu regions also migrated to the southern belt towards Tanjavur district and Tirutani.
Yeah.
So many of them were Telugu. Like Melatur is the biggest example.
Yeah.
They are in Tanjavur district. They all speak only Tamil. None of them know Telugu, but all the dramas are in Telugu.
Okay.
So every single drama that they perform, Harishchandra Natakam or Prahalada, the entire text is in Telugu.
Yes. Yes. But what about the influence on Mohiniyattam? For instance, I mean, Mohiniyattam in its present form today dates from Swati Tirunal.
Yeah.
More or less. So a lot of his writings are what are performed primarily. And you don't really find anything other than Sanskrit, Braj and Malayalam, Manipravalam in Mohiniyattam. How come that remained like that, and yet the names of the compositions reflect those of Kuchipudi or Bharatanatyam?
So the Telugu influence was not much there in Kerala. There was no much, there was no Telugu rulership much. Kerala is a completely different, a study altogether. Their language, it's a completely different, it's a very independent study altogether. So there is no overlap of the tradition. Now, the reason why the word Shabdam or some other word would have been, juxtaposed into Mohiniyattam is because
simultaneously in Mohiniyattam.
That is because simultaneously, when the Ponnaya Pillai and the quartet were making the repertoire for Bharatanatyam, they were also fashioning the repertoire in Swati Tirunal's court for Mohiniyattam.
Okay, so it's through them. So again, it is the Tanjore quartet influence.
Again, it is through the Tanjore quartet that this similarity happens.
Okay.
So something that is, adapted to that as a Tillana would be also adapted to this as a Tillana.
Uh-huh.
So they worked with the different body, movement and the cultural connotations of each regional form. And they basically applied the same formula to both.
Okay.
Because after the Tanjavur court, they were with Swati Tirunal for a very long time. Yeah. After, doing this thing with the Tanjavur court and creating this repertoire, they were also in the patronage of Swati Tirunal, where they created the repertoire, a large part of the repertoire for Mohiniyattam also.
Okay.
So that could be a very big reason.
Because that is
why you find this overlap.
Compositions, musically, the compositions are named the same way. Though I don't know about the Sopana Sangeeta tradition and how that is a very large tradition in Kerala. But
Yes, that's a very big tradition.
in the dance format, the compositions, the kirtanam or a padam or a tillana or a shabdam or a jatiswaram, they're named the same way, but
yes,
they're all not in the same language or in comparative terms of content. So that is always something that I personally have always been intrigued by. But you've
that is also that is because of the Tanjavur quartet and Swati Tirunal linkages.
Aha.
It's primarily because of that it would have happened that way. If we talk about the Varnam, we can further clarify this idea. So when you see, now I would like to mention one book here, which I think also it will be very interesting for dancers to get hold of this book. This book is called Varna Varnanam.
Okay.
And it's written by one Kanakam Devaguptapu ji, who's a Chennai-based researcher and a person who has written. So she has compiled about 26 Varnams in this book with transcreation, transliteration, and notation, everything. Also accompanied by the musical part of it. So somebody has also sung these Varnams. Now, if you see Varna Varnanam and what Kanakamji says, and in the foreword, the very great scholar Dr. Veturi Anandamurthy Garu, he speaks about this idea of the Varnam. So interestingly, I'm just giving the information that I have gathered from all these places. Basically, in Anandamurthy Garu's words, what he says is, so he mentions to us one quotation of Annamacharya's grandson, Talapaka Chinnanna. When Talapaka Chinnanna was referring to his paternal uncle, that is the son of Annamacharya, Talapaka Narasacharya, whose period is again only 15th century.
Okay.
So it's as early as that, the 15th century. So he says, Pada Cheppenu Varna Paddhati Eedu Jodu Ledani Sabhajochi Vadinche. So this is a line he uses. So he says the Narasacharya has created padas in the Varna Paddhati. He has used the Varna Paddhati to create his songs. So when you look at this whole thing, now Anandamurthy Garu concludes, he says that when you say Varna, which we were discussing in the first episode, when you say Varna Paddhati, it primarily refers to the idea of Abhyasa Gana or Abhyasa. That is using the raga, using the practice of the raga. So the Varna Paddhati as an idea refers to the practice of music or the Abhyasa aspect, which is what we know of from the time of Purandaradasa or anybody. So they're creating those little Varnams or creating Geetams or these things. These are primarily the system on which the idea of Varna is based. But he says today the modern time, what we know of as the Padavarnam is not what it actually refers to when he says Varna Paddhati. It more refers to Abhyasagana or the practice of a certain raga. Now, when you see what background Kanakamji has provided also on this idea, Varnam also comes with the idea of praise.
Okay.
So you have this thing called the Biruda. So Biruda is again the Namavalis.
Yeah.
Where you are giving a title or you're saying something great about these particular, deities or gods.
Yeah.
So she says Varnam or Varnasara, this idea was prevalent for almost 1,000 years. And these Birudas or these linkages, they link them to the Prabandha ancillaries, which we were talking about in the earlier, idea. And she says, this is like, it's called Bhava Abhinaya Prabandhas, as an idea. And it models itself exactly on the same ideas that the Pada, the Shabda, and all these ideas model itself. So in the present context, if you see the way the Padavarnam is today, it is quite clear that you can trace it back to primarily the 17th century in the Telugu land, which is much pre or much before the Tanjavur Quartet time.
Yes.
So
Well,
the
also,
17th,
if you look at the word itself, see the usage again, when you say Varna and when you say Varnam or Varnan, automatically it changes. Varna is more what you spoke of, the earlier connotation of, of an expressive content in a certain hue. Varna as the hue of that.
Yes.
But when you talk about Varna,
the hue of that idea,
Varnana, you know, where it becomes a description, then you narrow down the possibility in that particular composition and you have to stick to whatever it is in that content that you're putting in.
Yes.
So I guess that is
absolutely
the journey that it took to come to the Padavarna.
Definitely. And they are pretty convinced, many of the people who have worked on this, that the Padavarnam that we find in the present day format would have been created for dancing primarily, actually.
Yeah.
More than for music. Because if you trace it back to the earliest composer of Varnams, he's from the Telugu land, Govinda Samaya. He's the earliest composer of Varnam, of the Varnam system. Now, Govinda Samaya and Kuvana Samaya, two brothers who belong to the Karveti Nagaram area of Andhra, they have composed five major Varnams. Now, their period is between 1680 and 1710, which much predates anything that the Tanjavur Quartet has done.
Yes.
So then there's something very interesting which I found, which I thought was, something for us to really think about, was that this Mohana Varnam, the Kedara Gaula Varnam and the Navarozu Varnam of Govinda Samaya, they are printed in this text called the Sangeeta Sarvartha Sarasangraha, which is a compilation of one scholar called Tirunagiri Veena Ramanujaya. It predates the Sangeeta Sampradaya Pradarshini at least by half a century.
Okay.
So, Sangeeta Sampradaya Pradarshini, which later talks about, Subbarama Dikshitars, which talks about the Swarajati and, it talks about the Suseni Swarajati and all that. A text which predates it at least by 50 years has already spoken about these three primary Varnams of Govinda Samaya.
Are these Varnams, other than in this book that she has put them together, are they still part of the musical tradition? Have you heard them?
Only with Swapna Sundariji.
Swapna Sundariji has put back the Mohana Varnam.
Okay, yes.
And parallelly, it's also interesting here that the Devadasi tradition or the Telugu Kalavantalu tradition of the East Godavari district of northern coastal Andhra also perform 5 major Varnams.
Okay.
And these 5 have also been sourced by Swapna Sundariji, and she has worked on them. So the Bhairavi Pedda Varnam, the Bhairavi Chinna Varnam, the Navarozu Varnam, the Todi Varnam. So there is a controversy about the whole idea of even some of the compositions which are actually attributed to Ponnaya Pillai.
Yeah.
So because like Danike Tagujanara. So even though it is attributed, the Todi Varnam, to the Tanjavur composers, there is a lot of interpolation you can find in these. So a lot of people feel that since, they are primarily, and we can see in some cases also, like, Swamini Varatsolladi, for example, the Varnam in Tamil, the precursor to that was Swamini Rammanave, which was a Telugu Varnam. So you can find a lot of this has actually percolated from the Telugu land into the Tanjavur area. Similarly, the Varnam. So it's undoubted that the Varnam as a composition has come from the Telugu land.
Mm-hmm.
And it has come to Tanjavur and influenced by this idea of the Padavarnam. You find others like, Ponnaya Pillai and Pachimiri Amadi Appaya and all that have fashioned their Varnam compositions a lot based on these Varnam ideas.
These old Varnams that you're referring to, was their format the same as the current Varnams that we do?
Almost, except that some of them are very elaborate. Like the Mohana Varnam. Yes.
That of course, I mean, I don't think even what we did, I don't think is being done today, 20 years since then. So that is of course paucity of time, paucity of attention.
Lot of
all
things.
of that has led to this, because I know we were told
Govinda Samaya's Varnams are very...
One Varnam could go on the whole night by the time they
described. Oh yes, absolutely.
Went through it. So obviously nothing of that sort is being done today. So, but otherwise the format was like this. What about the format aspect? The Tirmanam.
So that is what is interesting. That is what is interesting. If we look into the background of the Devadasi tradition, from where this Varnam became a primary dancing piece. So if you look at the idea of the Kalavantalu tradition and Varnam being the central piece of their Kacheri Atta, it is interesting for us to note that it is an Abhinaya piece for them.
Okay, it's not a Nritta piece.
No, they don't do much. They don't do Nritta at all, actually. So the idea here is very interesting, because the the Bhogam, or the dancers, or what they were called, the Bhogam Sani dancers, if you see the definition of Bhogini in the Nritratnavali, it says singer dancer. So she can't just be a dancer, she has to be a singer and a dancer.
Yeah.
So Varnam was the place where they could show their musical skills also.
Okay.
So their system of presenting the Varnam was that they would sing the Swaras and they will do Abhinaya for the Sahitya. That was the pattern for the Varnam presentations. They will hold extensive mudra and facial Abhinaya for the Pallavi, the Anupallavi. They will sing the Muktaiswara themselves, then they will dance the Abhinaya. Then they will sing the Charanams and all the Chittaswarams, they will sing and they will do Abhinaya for the Sahityam alone. So it was primarily a central Abhinaya piece for them, not a Nritta piece.
Okay.
That itself is a huge change that we see today.
Yeah. But what would you say would be the time period for this change? Is there any indication?
I think the formatted versions of all these traditions, when it's a post-colonial thing, the idea, and proscenium stage is a big reason also, because, in that small area where you're doing your kacheri, if you're singing and you're dancing and you're presenting it, you won't be breathless, right? So you can sing and you can dance. But if you have to dance on a proscenium stage and, when everything shifts to the auditorium, when the context is taken away, now it becomes very difficult for you to be having to cover space, to look after the space dynamics of this modern idea, and to be also singing and dancing. So this thing of, because if you look at the older jatis, I'm sure even as a Kalakshetra student, you would see how simple the jatis were in the Varnams initially in Kalakshetra.
Yes, totally.
If you see the, any of the Varnams that you all used to perform, they will be simple presentations of the technique. That's it. Very simple. There won't be any history, histrionics, gimmicks or anything in that.
No,
there would be nothing.
Kalakshetra Varnam still don't have that, but I think that this entire idea of making the Nritta portion equal to the Abhinaya portion, which is a difficult part in a Varnam, is it's that showpiece ideology has come in from there.
So today, because we have divorced it from the context.
Yes.
So today there were several contexts attached to it. The fact that it was a cultural, identity, the fact that it was a certain, thing, a kind of a social activity and cultural activity and all of this. Today, we are left with one thing which we need to fulfill. Entertainment. We have to entertain an audience. who is disconnected to the very context of that particular tradition. So this is the reason why we have, why you see swarams, and many of the dancers can't sing themselves. So what do you do with that swaram? So let's showcase the technique there. So it would have been something trial and error, something that happened with default.
So,
It would have been a default thing.
let us come to the second part, because it's very linked to this, which is where we were speaking, you and I, when we were speaking before this, on the idea of how each of these nomenclatures have actually reduced the capacity of the exploration of the rasas, because one particular item must bear a certain stamp of a certain rasa in a certain manner and cannot deviate from that. And it is no longer about the format of that composition, but the content of that composition.
Exactly.
And you know, I know you and I spoke about it, but I'd like it if you could share it with the audience, with our audience here.
Yes, absolutely. So yes, as you said, because of the compartmentalization, and saying that, okay, this is a nritta piece, this is an abhinaya piece. Now, this is an abhinaya piece, but this, since it is called a kriti, it must have only devotional aspect. Since it is called a padam, this must have only the erotic or the shringara component. So these are boxes that we have very successfully boxed ourselves in today. And we are very much boxed into that idea. Now, but if you look at the very idea of pada composition, Jayadeva, when he composed Gita Govindam and he introduces Gita Govindam, he says, Yadi Hari Smarane, if Hari Smarana, or thinking of Hari or bhakti of Hari is your goal, then listen to Jayadeva Saraswati, listen to the Saraswati of Jayadeva, he says. But the work is extremely an erotic work.
Totally. It's a masterpiece of presentation of the most intimate aspect of the union of Krishna and Radha. But
absolutely,
one looks at it in that manner because of the manner of the writing. However, I have seen the same Ashtapadi presented in extremely refined manners, in which the concentration is on the aspect of that union rather than on the manner of that union. I've also seen the exact opposite.
Yes, I know what you're saying. So what I'm saying is that it's interesting that if you look at it in the temple ritual context, the Gita Govindam is sung as a temple ritual also in the Jagannath temple. Now, it is highly erotic content for us because we as dancers are looking at the content and seeing, okay, how is this another padam for us?
Yeah.
Or how is this piece a piece for us to translate into abhinaya?
Yeah.
But if you look at the context of the, it is a sacred text. It's like a Bible for them.
Mm-hmm.
For the Shuddha Advaita followers who follow Jayadeva, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Vallabhacharya, Rupa Goswamin, and the whole Krishna Bhakti cult, if you look at that, Gita Govindam, with all its eroticism, is like a Bhagavad Gita for them.
Yeah.
It's like a text of
devotion.
Sacred devotion.
Yes.
Sacred devotion.
It's a statement of
devotion. It's a statement of devotion, and the way it is sung or the way it is recited in the Garbhagruha of the Jagannath temple, it as a ritual, has nothing to do with the way we are dancing it or anything. It's got nothing to do with the dance part. It is a highly ritualistic idea. It is used as a ritual. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the metaphysical aspect of the Gita Govindam also, the idea of 21 days, the idea of the rise of the moon, there are many. I mean, Gita Govindam is a different discussion topic altogether, because when he says,
we shall bring you back for. Because the Gita
Yes.
Govindam is one text that spans all our classical dance forms. That is a extremely
Every form.
interesting aspect of the Gita Govindam. So that is something that we will definitely come back to.
Yes.
And I think it would be of great
It's
interest.
something. It's just something to leave the listeners with a thought, or the viewers with a thought, that if bhakti was something different from Shringara, or if Shringara was considered to be something that is even required to be cleansed, then we could just take Gita Govindam as an example of it being used as a ritual based text, recited as a ritual in the temple, and that is the primary text on which the entire philosophy of Shuddha Advaita is based. So then how are we going to understand this whole idea then of bhakti and Shringara if such an overlap is happening?
Mhm.
So our preconceived notions of bhakti is bhakti, Shringara is Shringara will be shattered there itself, just with the primary example of Gita Govindam.
Gita Govindam.
As a study, as a case study, even if you take Gita Govindam as a case study, our whole preconceived notion of this boxing will be shattered there itself. And if you see Annamacharya, it's exactly the same thing that happens 2 centuries later.
Later, yeah.
He completely uses erotic Shringara to emphasize the Vishishtadvaita philosophy. So he uses completely extreme eroticism, extremely beautiful, elements of
Imagery,
Shringara,
the imagery in his poetry.
imageries
Yes.
of Shringara to
Yes.
establish the Vishishtadvaita philosophy of the 6 principles of Sharanagati or Prapatti. So then we need to question ourselves and think, what is the dichotomy then? So what is it? Is bhakti Shringara or not? Or is Shringara bhakti or not?
Well, as
So
far as
it's a question.
as far as we've been taught, Shringara is the overarching thing over Bhakti, Sakhyam, Vatsalya, all of it, and Rati, Sambhoga. So all of it comes under Shringara because the Shringara is the mother emotion over all of this. So there is, as far as what we've been taught, there really is no demarcation as such between the erotic part of Shringara and the Bhakti part of Shringara.
They should not be, because even if you see the text, this is a very interesting idea here, because if you look at the 11th century poet like Bhoja, who wrote Shringara Prakasham, now his take is on Shringara is unique. No other, rhetorician or no other Lakshanika has spoken about Shringara the way Bhoja has spoken about it.
Yes.
So Bhoja in his Shringara, from him only we get Shringara Rasraj. That statement from his Shringara Prakasham is where we get that statement. Now for him, everything he says is Shringara. In fact, he also refers to Bharata and says, Bharata talks about the Purusharthas also as a form of, he takes the idea of the Purushartha also as several types of Shringara only. So he says, Kama Shringara is the physical manifestation of it. Artha Shringara, he talks about, Dharma Shringara and Moksha Shringara.
Mm-hmm.
So he says Dharma Shringara is when you want to establish, you're attached to the idea of Dharma. He calls Shringara attachment. And he calls Kama attachment. So you find this idea in the Natshastra also. But if you look at Bhoja, he establishes everything as Shringara. Everything under the overall umbrella of Shringara. So all the elements that you just spoke about, whether it is Sakhyam or whether it is Rati or whether it's Vatsalyam or whether it's any other bhava, he categorizes it as Shringara. Now what happens when the Krishna Bhakti poets come? In Rupa Goswamin, who comes a century and a half, 2 centuries after Bhoja, he takes all these ideas and he classifies it as Bhakti. And he calls it Bhakti Rasa. So when he says Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu or Ujjvala Neelamani, he takes this as Bhakti Rasa, and he says there are 5 kinds of bhaktis: Vatsalya, Shanta, Preeta, Madhura, and Preyas. So he talks about these 5 kinds of bhaktis. The same thing that was spoken about Shringara as Shringara by Bhoja, the same thing Rupa Goswami says is bhakti. Identical classifications. So we need to assess this, and we need to understand what is it that started with the bhakti movement. What is the idea? This is what we were discussing.
That is where I think that was one of the points which we discussed, which really interested me. That is where this entire trying to drape everything with the veil of bhakti began, I believe. I think that is part of what happened. And that is where all these itemizations also began, the kirtanam and the, moving away from the padam. And the padam was specifically put aside as a philosophical content. Even the Shringara part was, we were taught to look for the philosophy behind the Shringara rather than trying to get the this thing, the idea of the Shringara towards a divine union or towards a divine experience. We kept moving away from that and trying to make it all bhakti pradhanam.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is also why these boxings happened. And that is why a lot of people don't do Javli at all, because Javli, they were not able to cover up in the bhakti thing at all. And it had to become, so a lot of people don't do Javli at all and take pride in saying that, we don't teach Javlis.
Yes, that's true. So
in Tamil, they say Madi Poradu.
Yes. So it's not, sanctified enough for us to be able to, that's exactly what I've understood in that idea. So,
that is part of one of the reasons that I wanted you to speak about this. And this, I'm sorry, whenever I'm talking to Anupama ji, I forget to address the audience altogether. That is because I'm just so fascinated at the interchange that I get caught up in this. But it is one of the reasons that I started this series with Dr. Anupama, is because we as practitioners, whether of music or of dance, or even just as rasikas, need to be aware of the fact that we may choose to subscribe to these changes or not. But we need to be aware that there were certain constraints at certain points of time in history that brought about these changes. They need not be irreversible changes. We should be able to traverse these lines freely and experience the beauty of the compositions as they were intended, rather than what they portended for the viewer or for the practitioner. And that is where I think these series have been really, really helpful in removing some of those layers of the heavy grammar that we had pushed our musicality in dance into. Because of course there is so much more that still needs to be explored. There are layers and layers and layers that we haven't even touched upon. And of course we will need, as Anupama ji keeps saying, we will need musical scholars to do that part of the delving into it. But there's already so much that we as dancers and practitioners of dance can do with the knowledge that we have started the discussion on, I hope. When we have these discussions, it makes it easier for us when we are discussing with our musicians to say, all right, this is what I would like to portray. Can you give me a piece of music that is not bound by, but which is something Satish is used to, because I keep saying that to him. Just give me something new, give me something different. If somebody's done it, I don't want to do it. Give me something else. And so he keeps digging out new pieces for me. But I have, even myself, and I consider myself a really seeking person, I have never gone into the details as I have gone into them with you. And for that, I must really thank you. Yes?
I need to ask her.
Yeah, go ahead.
I asked this question to you in the beginning, Anupama ji, about the the choice of the Raga Mohanam for pieces like Shabdam. Since you are also Kuchipudi practitioner apart from Vilasini.
Yes.
Could you tell us why is this Raga chosen, or why is that the most of the compositions like the Shabdam or the Pravesha Daru is always in Mohanam in Kuchipudi as opposed to what we use as which is Kambuji in Bharatanatyam, if there is any information?
Yes. So yes, actually, why exactly it is, we don't know. There is a history behind Ananda Bhairavi being, a very favorite composition, a raga of the Kuchipudi people. So there is also a legend here connected to Ananda Bhairavi because, watching some presentation of theirs in Ananda Bhairavi, the legend goes that Tyagaraja saw this and he said, I will not compose in Ananda Bhairavi after this. So he gives Ananda Bhairavi to them and says, okay, you compose it. I'm not going to touch this raga. This is to be done only by the Bhagavatas.
Okay.
Now, but when you look at the Kuchipudi Yakshagana Paddhati, they have a few ragas which they really love. Ananda Bhairavi and Mohana is one of them. Now, Mohana, and we have in Kamboji also. See, that's what I'm saying. Our Shabdams in Kuchipudi are either done in Mohana or in Kamboji. Also, it is not that all the Shabdams are done in Mohana. Now, why exactly they are done only in Mohana? That, the music, practitioners of the Kuchipudi village will have to tell us. Now, if somebody like PVG Krishna Sharma sir was alive, he would have been able to tell us exactly why that is. But my surmise is that the narrative melodic structure of it is very conducive for Mohana. You correct me if I'm wrong.
I think
because idea of
I think the usage in Kuchipudi as opposed to the usage in Bharatanatyam of this particular piece, because in Kuchipudi it is so descriptive, and it is, I think it's a much wider presentation than the Shabdam presentation in Bharatanatyam. And Mohanam has the capacity as a ragam, as Anupamaji said.
But having said that, the musicality in Kuchipudi is much limited actually. Because every line goes, Dasharadavara Kumarudavaiti Vidaiva Kaushiku Yagamuga. It goes like that. So it is more because of the texture of Mohana.
I think it's more prose friendly raga.
Yeah. It's prose friendly. That's what it's Gadya. It's more
Gadya friendly.
It's narrative based.
Yes.
You have straight notes.
Yes.
There is no confusion. It's an Audava raga. You can just, just keep going up and down in that with ease.
Even a non-musician can sing it easily.
I can sing.
If I may say,
I can sing. Any of us can just sing it.
Music, but yes, it's a straight
tune. Because it's narrative based.
Yes.
And the idea is to tell. In Telugu we have a quotation. It says "Katte kotte teche." So you tell the story just like a synopsis.
Uh-huh.
So if you tell the Ramayana, he'll say "Katte kotte teche." So katte means he made the bridge.
Right.
Kotte, he killed Ravana. Teche, he brought Sita. So it's like that. So it's like I came, I saw, I conquered kind of a thing.
Yes.
So like that, Shabdam is also like that. So I think because of that, Mohana is very conducive to, as you said, the structure of a narrative. That would be the primary reason I'm thinking.
That is a thought on the different sorts of ragams, is a thought we are going to have to park for later. I must tell my audience that this was something that I suddenly thought of last time and asked Anupamaji once we had finished our discussion with all of you, was that why are certain periods devoted to certain types of names for the poets? The one period of dasas, one period of devas, one period of kavis, one period of acharyas. And that is something that I'm going to leave with you, because I want to know, because it also helps to date compositions and also gives us an orientation towards what the attitude of the author towards writing was. I think it made a lot of sense to me when Anupamaji in passing referred to all the Dasa poets. And I said, wow, really? Actually, they were all, that was the period when everybody was a Dasa. And that really made, and it was the general idea. That was the time when Bhakti was at its peak. And everybody was wanting to be, at the feet of the Savior. And maybe that is how those names came. And we're going to have sessions on that, definitely.
And it's also the post, Islamic invasion, Buddhism, Jainism taking a stronghold around the 10th, 11th centuries. So there had to be like a rebottled, reinvented version of Hindu thought.
Yes.
And this idea started with the three acharyas coming in.
Yes.
So with the advent of Shankaracharya, Madhvacharya, and Ramanujacharya, and their three philosophies of Advaita, Dvaita, and Vishishtadvaita, that started off this whole bhakti wave. Because it was like a reinvented version, or today, if we are talking about it from the point of view of our, internet space or the digital space, we will probably say an upgraded version of, Hindu thought.
Hinduism began from that period, yes.
So the whole purpose became propagatory. It became bhakti oriented.
So you see, that is what I'm saying. As you can see, those names, the acharyas. They were acharyas. They were not devas. They were not dasas. They were acharyas. So they were the preceptors.
They were the preceptors. They were the creators of that philosophy.
Yeah. So you get to understand what the orientation was. But definitely, I don't want to touch on it in passing like this. Sure. I want us to do this in depth, because those are very, very relevant insights into the musical compositions that we take so much for granted when we are dancing.
Yes,
and totally. I think that it would be hugely beneficial. I can speak totally for myself if we do delve into those aspects. But for now,
sure.
Thank you so much on behalf of everybody. And you must have been reading up the rave reviews that the discussions have been receiving, because everybody is fascinated by the ease with which you bring all of this information into common discussion, because that is what has been missing. We don't normally delve into things that seem durbodhya to us, that we're going to really have to work really hard trying to understand this, so let it be. That's a different discussion. But the fact is that I, as a choreographer, dancer, practitioner, feel that unless I know these little bits, and you're a dancer, you're not a musicologist, but look at how you have expanded your area of information to include all of this. And that is what informs your performance. And that is what we want to be able to share with our audience. Certainly, I want to do that with my students and anybody who's listening in on these conversations of ours. And that is why it's such a joy to see Satish, whom we consider to be an established singer, exponent, but he's also constantly learning, absorbing, asking, seeking. And that is the sort of exchange that really enriches these little exchanges of ours. And thank you for that.
Absolutely. I mean, the more we talk, the more we discuss, the more we realize how much we don't know.
Exactly.
So, we just have to.
That's always the starting point of research, is it not? To know what.
And it's very daunting, because the more you go into it, the more you realize, oh my God, this is not even the tip of the iceberg. So you don't know where you're heading or whether you'll ever get anywhere. But yes, it's interesting.
Well, it's okay. Even if we are only in the frothing waves at the edge of the ocean, we are still moving towards the center.
We're moving towards, somewhere. It is not static.
Every wave brings its own taste. And thank you for the wonderful taste of yours, because it has really been, I'm telling you, I am always talking to my audience. But in these past 3 episodes, I've just been talking to you. Because that is where my entire concentration has been. Thank you so much for being such a wonderful fountain of information. And I know that all our audience has thoroughly enjoyed it. And we look forward to so much more from you. Thank you, Satish, for connecting us I will be eternally grateful to you for this because I did.
Thank you.
I mean, other than knowing your name, which I did know, I did
Okay.
not. I did not know much about you at all. And I'm not sure that I know much about you, but I do know so much more than I knew when we started 3 weeks ago on this journey. Thank you so much for being with us. Thank you, Satish, for being with us. And to our audience,
Thank you.
thank you for being
Thank
with
you
us.
so much.
And the reason that we don't have a dance piece accompanying this discussion is you don't need anything beyond what this entire discussion has been to even feel the dance part of it. So we will dance again next week.
Yes.
Till then, namaskar.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.